welcome to our second Latin catch-up video. There are only two of you who missed last time. Everybody else was here. It was fun. And we reviewed the second declension, adjectives, and you got the being verb. So I'm just going to run briefly through those three things for the two of you who weren't here, so that way you can stay on track. And when you are back, you will not be far behind at all. So, our declension study so far has been on the first declension. If you find your sheets, you want the sheet that says the cases in Latin. And you'll remember we were just doing the first declension over here, and everybody seemed to be doing pretty well with that. You remember that when you have nouns, you take the genitive ending of a noun, like puellae, of the girl. Take the genitive ending here, cut it off, and add whatever whatever ending you want for your first declension. So in this case it would be I, I, autumn, is, as, is, and you add those, and it's singular or plural of your cases. Remember, nominative, genitive, accusative, ablative, singular, plural. So you remember all this. So when we go to fill out our endings for the first declension, they are I, eh. I put this line in the wrong place to separate the singulars from the plurals. And then I, aurum, is, as, is. And then I. Note that the vocative is always the same as the nominative, except here in the singular. In the plural, I and I, they're the same. So, that's first declension. Look at the ending of the noun, and you remember, okay, it's in therefore it's accusative, so it must be the direct object of the verb. It ends in aurum, so it's genitive plural, so it's modifying something else. Of the men, of the girls, something like that. Now, we talked about how the first declension is predominantly feminine. Almost all of the nouns in the first declension have the feminine gender. The exceptions were poeta and nauta, poet and sailor, because to the Roman mind, those are only male occupations, and so they were masculine, even though they had grammatically feminine endings. But overwhelmingly feminine stuff in the first declension. The second declension has home to two genders, masculine and neuter. And I'm just going to copy down your sheet, which you should be following along with. So this part here is the first declension. And over here is going to be the second declension. And the second declension is us, e, long I, us, e, o, o, eh. Get that to line up a little better. And then e, aurum, is, os, is, e. So, you'll notice some things right away. Like, oh no, I have to learn a new set of endings for masculine nouns, and you do, but they're pretty similar. And you'll notice some things right away, patterns. So, just like over here, the nominative singular, genitive singular here is the same as nominative plural, a, he, and a, he. Same over here. The genitive singular along I is the same as the nominative plural down here. And you look over here. They also compare this way. Aurum for genitive plural, aurum for genitive plural. And us, just like the plurals are almost the same, right? Is, same. As, os, basically the same. Is, still the same, and they're both the same here and the same here. So take time to just stare at your declensions and think about what's similar and what am I trying to look for. For example, accusative singular, you start to see that the first declension is characterized by A's, and the second by U's. Us. U's and O's. I, O. O. Arum, orum. As, os. You see patterns. Now, you just have to memorize these two things. What I said in class was the things that you do have to memorize in Latin by brute force memorization are well worth it. They pay off huge dividends. So if you remember these, I, ar, mi, sa, si, sai, you can carry that around with you whenever you see an ending that looks like that. You can rattle it off in your mind and then say, arum, genitive plural. And then you're fine, and you just keep going. So just to be clear, the second declension endings, nothing changes about the function in the sentence. They're still nominative is the subject. Dative is still the indirect object. Accusative is still the direct object. Vocative is still direct address. All those things are still the same. There's just a different set of endings to show the second declension because these are masculine mostly. So if you have confusion on that, email me and let me know. I think everyone's got it though. I'm not sure. Second declension is also home to the neuter, and the neuter paradigm is almost identical to the masculine paradigm with two exceptions. I'll write it out. E, O, O, E, orum, orum, is, is. So, this doesn't look like a T. It's not. It's a long I. Remember, when the I's are long, we put the macrons instead of the dots. So, you see the two differences already. It's basically the same as the second declension masculine, but the second declension neuter, what's different? Well, the first difference is that the accusative and the nominative are always the same. So in the masculine second declension, the nominative and the accusative are different, us and In the neuter, and is the same in the accusative. And the difference in the plural is only that instead of e and os for the accusative plurals, they are and but they're the same again. Same nominative and accusative. Down here, same nominative and accusative. Why the accusative does that, not exactly sure, but it does. If you're thinking to yourself, oh no, if the nominative and the accusative have the same endings, and therefore how will I tell which one is the subject and the object? That's true. That will happen sometimes, and you'll be confused about it. But knowing the gender of your nouns will help you. And looking at the sentence with context. We've been doing a lot of composition and a lot of translation in class. So I think you guys, I feel, maybe you don't feel, but I feel that you guys are coming along in terms of understanding what's going on in a sentence and sort of getting a feel for where the subject and object are in a Roman sentence. So that's pretty much it for this. First declension, mostly feminine. Some of it are, there are some masculine nouns as we saw. The second declension here, there's one set for masculine, one set for neuter. They're pretty much the same, those two very small differences. And then if you look across the board, a lot of similarities. Again, o. Vocative is always the same. Down here, arum, orum. Is is the same, but os, is. Take some time, stare at your cases part of your sheet, and get a sense for what you expect to happen in different cases. And finally, memorize these. This week, put the first declension on a card, put the second declension masculine on a card, put the second declension neuter on a card, and sit there all throughout the day and be like, or whatever it is you're doing. Drill it into your head because it'll pay huge dividends later. So the second thing we learned on Saturday was about the being verb, which you guys have been wanting, and here it is now. You'll remember that in a lot of languages, some of you have had Spanish, a lot of languages, the being verb is
irregular, doesn't decline like a normal noun, or conjugate like a normal verb, rather. Don't get those two mixed up. Verbs conjugate, nouns decline. Anyway, we remember from Latin that O-S-T, mus, tis, unt is how we remember singular, plural, first, second, third person, first, second, third person. This is how we remember the personal endings, person and number of a verb. Watch the being verb and see if you see any similarities.
The being verb, the infinitive is esse.
Should look familiar to some of you.
And then its conjugation is sum, es, est, singular, and the plural is sumus, estis, sunt. Now, anything similar? The answer is of course. OST mus tis sunt, MST, see it here, mus tis unt, TS. The only one that's different is the M. Later on, you're going to find out that that's not actually irregular, but for now, it's basically the same. What's irregular about the being verb? Well, it doesn't have the same stem. If you did cogito, it's cogit, cogitas, cogitat. It's the same stem all the way down, right? But in the being verb, it changes sometimes. So sometimes it's SU, sometimes it's ES, and it changes. Here, sum, this is S est, sumus, estis, there's SU down here too. So sometimes ES, sometimes SU, doesn't really matter. Memorize this. Sum es est, sumus estis sunt, just like you should already have memorized OST, mus tis sunt. I think we're going to do a paradigm week. Just memorize paradigms, because once you memorize them, you don't have to look anything up. It's all just part of you. Latin must become a part of you. Anyway, that's the being verb. It's used identically to normal verbs, with an exception that I'll show you. And this will make sense too. So, if we were going to say, like our normal example that we've been using, that everyone seems to like, is that Jan punches Jill. We talked about receiving the action and performing the action. Jan performs, Jill receives, or if you switch them, Jill performs, Jan receives, whatever. With a being verb, you don't really have that happen. So if I say, for example, cat is, what's your cat's names? I'm having a brain freeze. Whatever. Michelle calls him Elvis, right? So, the cat is Elvis. Whatever the cat's name is. Libby. There we go. Well, here's the being verb. But who's performing the action of being? Who's receiving the action of being? It doesn't really matter, because it's not a performer or a receiver situation. It's just an equivocation, being. This is that, and that's the end of the story. There's not really much to say about that. Well, what does that have to do with grammar? Well, in Latin, we say girl is great. You don't have this adjective yet, but you will at the end of this lesson. Puella est magna, the girl is great. Well, they're both nominative. The short A ending is nominative, remember that? They're both nominative. If you were to say, the girls, remember? The girls are great. They're both nominative plural. There's just an equivocation. Both are nominative. So when you have a being verb, in other words, you don't have to put the object in the accusative. You should put it in the nominative. And that's called a predicate nominative, if you're into fancy grammar. But that's all there is to it. And that makes sense, right? If something equals something else, there's no need for one to perform or one to receive the action. So, that's pretty much it for the being verb.
We review or learn adjectives. I just want to review quickly the second declension. So on your cases sheet, if you look at your cases sheet and you look for second declension masculine, you'll see the endings for it. And I said for the nominative ending, it's going to be US, or if you look in the sheet, it says US/ER, either one. So let's look at some of those nouns. You can find these on your word list. So puer is boy. Looks like puella, right? For girl. Puella. For girl. Right? Feminine ending, masculine ending, boy, girl. Cool. So when you want to decline a noun in the second or masculine or near second declension, just like with the first declension, you find the genitive, pueri, and you chop off the genitive ending and you add whatever endings you want. Sometimes the nominative is irregular. Very little, but it's irregular in a normal kind of way. So if you look on your word sheet, you'll see weary. That's your noun for man or hero. That's where we get virile from. And this doesn't look like US or ER, but it's nominative. And again, a while back you guys asked me, well, why do we have to memorize the genitive too? And I said, because the nominative could be irregular, and you need to know what the genitive looks like. In this case, weary. And then you'll know, okay, well, at least I have the stem, right? Because remember, when we go to decline it and put it in whatever case we need it to be in, go to the genitive, chop out the genitive ending, add whatever you want. Virorum, it's the genitive plural ending of the men. Easy. Just like first declension, nothing has changed, you just got to memorize a new set of endings. All their functions are the same. So, now, to talk about adjectives a little bit. Adjectives is, green, great, tired, stuff like that. Adjectives, you've got some adjectives on your word list if you want to look at those right now. And basically adjectives are really, really easy because they modify a noun, and all they have to do to modify a noun is pretty much be next to it and match its case and number and person. So, let's go with this. Or not person. I'll give you an example. So we just had magna. I just said puella magna. Puella est magna was our example. But I'm going to do this. A great girl. Let's say amat. So, puella magna puerum amat. The great girl loves the boy. So, simple sentence. You know this is the verb from amo, amare. OST, mustisunt, that's third singular. So, puerum, you see this? Accusative ending. It's the object, accusative singular. Now, what's going on over here? So we know puella is nominative, singular, so it has the short A. Be following along in your cases, be easy. Magna puella, that's the adjective, and the adjective, if you want the adjective to refer to the girl, the great girl, and not the great boy, then it has to match the case and number and gender of this. So, you can do that with the ending. Great girl, puella magna, it matches. Now, however, if we wanted the girl loves the great boy, then you would just simply change this. Ching, magnum. So, now what? Now what's going on? Well, is what? It's an accusative singular it's an accusative singular ending for the second declension. Now we know it can't go with this because it doesn't match this anymore. Now it has to go with this, magnum puerum, the great boy. So the girl loves the great boy, and we know that this goes with this because of the ending, because it's changed, because it matches. If it matches, it's modifying it. Now Lance had asked, well, see, when you say word order doesn't really matter, actually it kind of does matter. And I said, yes, it kind of does matter. So we want magnum to be close to whatever it's modifying. Just like with genitives, when we talked about having so-and-so's cat or of the cat or whatever. So I think we had an example, something about the poet praises the girl's food. The girl's, that's genitive, it's possessive, it's showing possessive on the food. And that has to go next to the girl, puella, escam, or escam puellae, right? Has to go next to it. Because if there's a bunch of nouns in the sentence, and there's one genitive, you don't know which noun the genitive goes with. Or like if there's a bunch of nouns that match magnum, like if she loves a bunch of things, a boy, and a cat, and a phone, then which one, and one of them is great, and they all have the same case ending, which one does it go with? Which one of these three things is great that she loves? Well, proximity will help you, right? So the rule is, on the whole, adjectives go after the nouns that they're modifying, like this, puella, magna. Let's make this, puella, magna, goes after. There are a few nouns that like to go before instead. Magna is one of them that likes to go before. Just like in English, the great girl, we say. We don't say the girl great. That sounds weird to us. But magna tends to go before. If it goes after, it's not the end of the world. And most of the time, you just should expect it to go after whatever is modifying. So, you know it goes after, except there are some exceptions, like magna. Doesn't matter. And you know, secondly, that it has to match case and number and gender of whatever it's modifying. And that's an adjective. That's pretty much the whole thing. Really, really easy because it's just matching. Now, there is one different thing about the adjective that's cool and a little tricky, but you know this already from English. So, sometimes adjectives can be substantive, which means that they can just take the place of a noun. I'll show you what I mean. So the word meek, that's an adjective, right? The boy was meek. He's scrawny, weak. So he's meek. That's an adjective. It modifies the boy. But when Christ says, the meek shall inherit the earth, on his famous sermon, meek here doesn't have any noun that it's modifying. It's just by itself, hanging out. What does that mean? Can you just have an adjective do that? Well, yes, it's a substantive adjective. What does he actually mean? He means the meek persons, or the meek people, or the meek ones will inherit the earth. If he said the tired shall inherit the earth, it means the tired people. Or if he said the green shall inherit the earth, that's a little weird, but it would mean the green ones. Perhaps aliens will inherit the earth. Whatever the case may be. So it's a substantive adjective. It just hangs out. And basically, all that means is you are free to treat an adjective as a noun by itself without having to have it modify anything. And we did that already in our example, right? Puella est magna. That an English word order for you. Puella est magna. The girl is great. It's just hanging out there. Actually, you know what? I take that back. That's not an example of substantive. It's still a good sentence, though, because it teaches you about how both have to be nominative. But let's say, I have a better sentence. Let's say this.
Okay,
let's check this one off. So first of all, find your verb, circle it. Person and number, OST must just unt. That's third person plural. They call. So we look around and we see, well, what's the subject? Oh, Magnai. What can that be? That's probably nominative plural, because we need a plural here to match up with this, right? So this is nominative plural. We know, remember I said may is always accusative. So this says, the great call me. Well, this is an adjective. The great what? Because it's being substantive, we can just imply the great ones or the great people call me. So whoever these great people are, they're calling me. Now, there's one other thing you can do. AE is a feminine ending, right? So it could be, we can add the great women call me, or the great ladies, or the great girls, or whatever the context is. Always look at context when you're translating something. So acceptable translations for this, you can add anything you want here that makes it make sense. The great ones call me, the great people call me, the great women call me, whatever it is. And if this was she, it's an adjective, remember it can be any gender. You can take any set of case endings you want. Magni, long I, the great. Again, acceptable translations for this are the great ones, the great people, but now, because it's masculine ending, it could be the great men call me. The great men, they call me to be one of them. That's it. You are free to use adjectives in this way as standing for stuff, and when you're translating them, you're free to translate anything you want into here. Great men, great ones. But if you're going to add men or women, it's got to match the gender, right? And that's pretty much it for adjectives. I just want to review, sum up everything we talked about, because there was 3 different things, and I don't want you to be confused. So, second declension, what's the new thing we learned? The endings for the second declension, both in masculine and in neuter, but they're pretty much very similar as you saw. Does anything change about sentence translation? No, you just have to be able to now identify both the first declension endings and the second declension endings, which means you must memorize your paradigms. And when you do, everything will be easy. Until then, grab your case sheet and always refer to it. Okay, here it is. And eventually you'll get used to it. And like I said, a good plan to review is to just stare at your case sheet for a little while every day and start to understand the pattern, or whatever works for you. So, we have the second declension, functions the same way. Now we've got masculine and neuter nouns that we can play with. Yay! Second thing, the being verb, which you guys wanted, and now you have. It's irregular, but we saw it's pretty much regular anyway, because that's how Latin is. Sum est, sunt. Memorize that. It might be on the quiz. And then the only new thing about the being verb is that if you're saying one thing is another thing, the cat is Libby, both are in the nominative. Because when you have a being verb, no one is performing or receiving the action, they're just both are the same thing. So both are nominative when you use the being verb in that way. And lastly, adjectives are super easy, I said, because A, you don't have to learn new endings. Adjectives just take whatever endings you need them to be. And they're super easy to use or to translate or to compose with because they just match the thing that they're modifying. They match and they're next to it. Again, most adjectives are after the thing you're modifying. Some, like Magnus, like to be before. Whatever, it's either before or after the thing it's modifying. It's right there. And it matches it in case and number and gender. And that's it. Email me with any questions you might have.